Hi guys. Tonight we are standing together at the edge of a frozen plain, long before cities, before houses, before the idea that cold is something you can simply turn off. The air bites gently at your skin, not violently, but persistently, like a reminder that it has all the time in the world. Snow crunches under your feet. Your breath leaves your mouth in slow white clouds, rising and fading. There is no shelter waiting ahead. No heated room. No extra layer tucked away just in case. This is the world. Early humans woke up in every single day. And here is the uncomfortable truth. You probably would not survive this. Not for long. Anyway, not with the habits you carry. Not with the way you expect warmth to be instant and effortless. The cold here does not attack you. It simply waits. Patient and calm, knowing that mistakes will come. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are here, let me know in the comments where you are listening from, and what time it is right now in your part of the world. Now, dim the lights, and let yourself step fully into this colder, older place. You do not think of this cold as an enemy yet. Early humans rarely did. To them, cold was a condition, like darkness or rain, something you moved within, not something you tried to conquer. There is a mainstream historical fact that archaeologists largely agree on. Early Homo sapiens spread into colder regions tens of thousands of years before complex buildings, agriculture, or metal tools existed. They did not wait for comfort to arrive first. They adapted their lives around exposure itself. You feel it now in your posture. You keep moving. Not fast. Not slow. Just enough to keep warmth alive in your muscles. Standing still feels wrong. Your body seems to understand this without instruction. That awareness was learned early in human history and passed down not through words, but through imitation. Children watched adults shift weight, stamp feet, rub hands, and they copied them long before they understood why. There is a quirky detail that often surprises people. Some evidence suggests early humans deliberately exposed themselves to cold regularly, even when shelter was nearby. The idea was not bravery, it was familiarity. Cold loses some of its danger when your body knows its patterns. Historians still debate whether this exposure created long-term physiological changes or whether it was purely behavioral adaptation. But either way, it worked. You listen closely now. The world is quieter than you expect. Cold air carries sound differently. Footsteps sound sharper. Breathing sounds louder. In this silence, awareness sharpens. You notice shifts in wind direction. You smell snow before it falls. A faint, clean scent that tells you what the sky is planning. These small signals mattered. Missing them could mean sleeping in the wrong place or traveling too far at the wrong time. Later civilizations would build walls to block cold. Early humans read it instead. They chose where to stop not by convenience, but by subtle signs. A slope that breaks the wind. A cluster of rocks that holds heat from the sun a little longer. A stand of trees that hums differently when a storm approaches. These decisions were made calmly, almost casually, but they were the difference between discomfort and danger. You squat briefly, feeling the cold ground through your feet. It is not pleasant, but it is honest. There is no illusion of separation between your body and the world around you. That separation would come later, with floors, shoes, beds, and insulation. For now, your body is part of the landscape, exchanging heat constantly. You are never fully warm, but you are also never shocked by sudden cold. Everything changes gradually. Here is another mainstream fact, often overlooked. Early humans did not aim for perfect warmth. They aimed for balance. Overheating could be as dangerous as freezing, especially when sweat-soaked clothing or hides. This is why you notice how carefully movement is paced. No sprinting unless necessary. No unnecessary exertion. Heat is precious, but so is dryness. There is a fringe idea that some anthropologists quietly enjoy discussing. They suggest that early humans may have intentionally chosen colder environments at times because cold reduced parasites, slowed decay, and preserved food longer. While this idea remains debated, historians still argue whether cold regions were avoided or selectively used for these subtle advantages. Either way, it challenges the idea that cold was always something to flee. You glance at the others around you. The group is small. Faces are familiar. There is comfort in proximity. Not emotional comfort yet, but physical. Bodies radiate heat. Standing close matters. Even now, you feel it when someone shifts nearer. This closeness is not romantic. It is practical. Social behavior here is shaped by temperature as much as by emotion. As evening approaches, the cold deepens slightly, but not suddenly. The light fades first. Your eyes adjust. You notice how activity slows naturally. No one announces bedtime. There is no strict schedule. The rhythm of the cold sets the pace. Movement becomes smaller, more deliberate. Fire will come soon. But even before that, your body prepares. Conserving energy, lowering expectations. Later, civilizations would look back and imagine this life as constant suffering, endless shivering, endless misery. That image comforts modern people. It reassures them that progress rescued humanity from something unbearable. But standing here, breathing steadily, alert but calm, you sense something different. This cold does not feel like punishment. It feels like a conversation you have learned how to participate in. You exhale slowly. The sound is soft, almost rhythmic. This is how the story begins. Not with technology, not with buildings, but with bodies that learned to listen, adapt, and respond. And as you stand here, feeling the cold settle into your muscles without panic, you begin to understand why early humans often survived cold better than many who came after them. You keep walking, slowly, steadily, letting the rhythm of your steps carry warmth upward from your feet. What you begin to notice now is not the cold itself, but how your body answers it. Muscles stay gently engaged even when you are not thinking about them. Your shoulders roll slightly. Your fingers flex and release. Nothing is rigid. Nothing locks up. Early human bodies were not built for stillness. And in cold environments, stillness was never neutral. There is a mainstream historical fact that physical anthropologists often return to. Early humans were generally more muscular and denser in build than many later agricultural populations. This was not about strength in a modern sense. It was about heat. Muscle produces warmth even at rest. Carrying more lean mass meant carrying a quiet internal fire that never fully went out. You feel that now. A subtle hum under your skin. Not hot. Not cold. Just alive. Fat mattered too, but not in the way people often imagine. It was not thick, soft padding like a winter jacket. It was distributed carefully by evolution, especially around the torso, protecting vital organs while still allowing limbs to move freely. Your arms and legs feel exposed, but not fragile. Blood keeps flowing. Fingers stay responsive. Early human circulation favored movement and warmth rather than comfort. You become aware of your breathing. It is deeper than usual. Slower. Fuller. Cold air enters your lungs. Sharp but clean. Your body does not panic. It adjusts. There is evidence that early humans had strong respiratory adaptations, including larger chest cavities relative to body size in colder regions. This allowed better oxygen intake and heat production. Historians still argue whether these traits were purely genetic or shaped by lifelong exposure. But the result is clear. Breathing itself helped keep you warm. There is a quirky detail that rarely makes it into textbooks. Some studies suggest that repeated cold exposure can train the body to activate brown fat, a special type of fat that burns energy to produce heat. While the exact role of brown fat in early humans is debated, historians still debate how much of ancient cold tolerance came from biological adaptation versus daily habit. Either way, your body here feels ready, not shocked. You crouch briefly, then stand again. Even small movements send warmth rippling through your legs. Early humans did this constantly without calling it exercise. Stretching, shifting, squatting, rising. These motions were woven into daily life. Cold punished stiffness more than weakness. The flexible body survived longer than the strong one. Later civilizations would slowly lose this relationship. Farming tied people to fields. Craftwork tied people to benches. Writing tied people to desks. Bodies became quieter. Muscles softened. Cold, once familiar, began to feel intrusive. You sense that contrast now, imagining a later farmer standing still for hours in winter soil, heat draining silently away. Your skin reacts too. You notice goosebumps forming and fading, tiny muscles raising hair that barely exists anymore. This reflex once mattered more. Body hair trapped air, creating a thin, insulating layer. Over time, humans lost much of it, relying more on clothing. Still, the reflex remains, a leftover signal from a colder past. There is another mainstream observation that feels almost poetic. Early humans rarely experienced sudden temperature changes. There was no stepping from freezing air into heated rooms, no stripping layers on and off. Temperature shifted gradually throughout the day. Your body learned to adjust in real time, staying slightly ahead of discomfort. Later civilizations created sharp contrasts, and with them, new vulnerabilities. You rub your hands together, not desperately, just thoughtfully. The friction warms them quickly. This works because blood flow is already high. Cold hands today often mean poor circulation, a modern problem tied to inactivity and stress. Early humans had neither luxury nor habit of staying still long enough for circulation to slow. There is a fringe idea that some researchers quietly entertain. They suggest early humans may have had a different baseline comfort level, one that modern people would describe as slightly cold. Living just below perfect comfort kept bodies alert and heat systems active. Historians still argue whether comfort itself weakened cold tolerance over generations. But standing here, slightly chilled yet calm, the idea feels plausible. You glance at the horizon. Light reflects off snow, bright but soft. Your eyes do not squint much. Pupils adjust. Eyelids narrow instinctively. Even vision adapts to cold environments. Every system works together, not in isolation. That coordination is something later societies would slowly disrupt with specialization and artificial environments. As the day continues, you feel steady, not cozy, not miserable, balanced. Early humans did not seek warmth the way later people did. They sought function. As long as fingers worked, feet moved, and breath stayed strong, the cold was manageable. It was only when bodies stopped answering properly that danger appeared. You take another slow breath, feeling your chest expand, ribs lifting against cold air. This body, in this moment, is doing exactly what it was shaped to do. And as you walk forward, warmth rising gently from muscle and motion, you begin to understand how much of cold survival lived not in tools or shelters, but in flesh itself. You settle closer to the glow ahead, and for the first time since stepping into this frozen world, warmth does not come from your own muscles alone. Fire is waiting, not roaring, not dramatic, but steady and patient, breathing softly like something alive. You do not think of it as a tool. You think of it as a presence, something that must be watched, fed, and respected, especially when the cold presses in from every direction. You crouch near the flames, feeling heat brush your face while your back still cools in the open air. This balance is deliberate. Turning fully toward the fire would invite sweat. Turning away would invite chill. Early humans learned to sit at angles, rotating slowly, letting warmth soak in without overwhelming the body. This habit feels natural now, almost instinctive, even though you were never taught it. Archaeological traces across multiple continents show that controlled fire was part of daily human life, long before permanent settlements existed. Charred bones, ash layers, and hearth remnants appear again and again in sites tens of thousands of years old. Fire was not reserved for emergencies or special meals. It was tended every day, through cold, wind, and darkness. Losing fire in winter could be fatal, so attention never drifted far from it. You notice how little fuel is used. No massive bonfires, no wasteful flames. Firewood is precious. Even here, early humans favored slow-burning materials, dense woods, dried dung, even peat in some regions. There is an often overlooked detail that surprises modern readers. Some groups intentionally kept fires small, not to conserve fuel alone, but to avoid drawing predators or rival groups. Warmth had to be quiet as well as effective. The fire crackles softly, sparks lift and vanish, smoke curls upward, thin and controlled. You position yourself so smoke drifts away from your eyes. This skill mattered. Smoke irritation could mean watering eyes, slower reactions, and restless sleep. Over time, people learned which woods smoked less, which burned cleaner, and which were worth the effort of carrying long distances. There is an ongoing discussion among researchers about whether early humans gathered around fire continuously or allowed it to die down at night. Some evidence suggests fires were kept alive almost constantly in colder seasons, passed from group to group like a shared responsibility. Others believe fires were sometimes allowed to fade once bodies settled close together. The question remains open, but what is clear is that fire shaped daily rhythm, not just comfort. You extend your hands toward the warmth. Skin tightens, relaxes, blood rushes back into fingers. This is not passive heating. It is interaction. Early humans did not place fire in the center of rooms. They placed themselves around it, adjusting distance, posture, and exposure moment by moment. Fire was dynamic, and so were the people who depended on it. A lesser-known observation from ethnographic studies shows that some hunter-gatherer groups treated fire almost like a companion. Stories were told to it. Gestures were made toward it. Children were taught not just how to light it, but how to read its mood. A low flame meant hunger. A popping flame meant moisture. A steady glow meant rest. While interpretations vary, many scholars note how emotionally integrated fire became in cold environments. As night deepens, the fire becomes the center of awareness. Sounds soften beyond its reach. Wind is still there, but muted. Shadows stretch and contract along faces and hands. Firelight warms color as much as skin. Pale faces glow gold. Furs deepen in tone. This visual warmth matters more than you expect. Darkness plus cold can drain morale. Fire pushes both back at once. You notice how sleep approaches differently here. No one lies flat immediately. People lean, squat, doze, wake, adjust. Fire demands attention even during rest. Someone shifts closer to add fuel. Someone else nudges embers inward. Sleep comes in layers, not in a single long drop into unconsciousness. This pattern protected the fire as much as the people. Later civilizations would enclose fire behind walls, then behind hearths, then behind stoves. With each step, fire became safer and less demanding, but also less intimate. Here, fire is never fully controlled. A spark can burn skin. A gust can scatter embers. Respect stays high because risk stays close. There is a subtle warmth that fire provides beyond heat. It dries damp clothing. It stiffens wet hides into usable forms. It preserves tools by driving out moisture. Cold is not just low temperature. It is wetness, stiffness, and decay. Fire counters all three at once. This made it invaluable long before metal or stone architecture existed. Some researchers point out an intriguing possibility. Fire may have reduced cold-related illness by lowering humidity and limiting certain pathogens near sleeping areas. While the evidence is incomplete, it adds another layer to why fire mattered so deeply. Warmth was not its only gift. Protection extended inward as well as outward. You listen as the group settles. Breathing slows. Movements become minimal but never stop completely. Someone stirs embers gently with a stick. Someone else shifts position, presenting a different side of their body to the heat. This choreography is quiet and practiced. No one explains it. Everyone knows it. Your eyelids grow heavy, but awareness remains. Firelight flickers behind closed eyes, casting faint patterns. You smell smoke mixed with hide and earth. This combination is grounding. It tells your body where it is and that, for now, the cold has been negotiated with successfully. There is a tendency in modern thinking to credit fire as a technological leap, a conquest over nature. Sitting here, that framing feels wrong. Fire did not defeat the cold. It partnered with people who already knew how to survive it. Without bodies trained for exposure, fire alone would not have been enough. You stretch slightly, careful not to break the calm. Muscles respond easily. Heat from earlier movement and heat from fire blend together. This is the ideal state. Not hot, not cold, alert, but drifting. The cold still exists beyond the ring of light, but it no longer feels threatening. It feels held at bay by attention, a beat, and shared responsibility. As the night settles fully, fire remains awake even as people drift in and out of sleep. It glows quietly, never forgotten, never ignored. And as you rest near it, you sense how this relationship, simple yet demanding, allowed early humans to face cold directly without fear. Long before walls, cities, or comfort learned how to intervene, you rise quietly and step away from the fading warmth, not because you want to, but because the land itself is calling for attention. Cold is never only about temperature. It moves. It presses. It flows like water across the ground. Early humans learned quickly that wind mattered more than snow, and that standing in the wrong place could drain heat faster than any long night ever could. You feel it now as you walk a short distance from the fire. The air shifts. One step feels manageable. Another feels sharp. Your cheeks tighten. Your ears sting slightly. You turn your head and notice how the wind slides along a low ridge, skipping one hollow entirely. The difference is immediate. In the hollow, sound softens. Breath steadies. Heat lingers just a little longer. Long before maps or measurements, people read landscapes with their bodies. Evidence from ancient campsites shows repeated use of specific land features that offered protection from prevailing winds. Shelters were often placed behind rock outcrops, inside shallow depressions, or at the edge of tree lines. These choices were not random. They were learned responses passed down through experience. You crouch and press your palm to the ground. It feels slightly warmer here, not warm in a comforting way, but less draining. The earth holds heat differently depending on exposure. A south-facing slope absorbs sunlight longer. A stand of stones releases stored warmth slowly after sunset. These details mattered. They were noticed because ignoring them came with consequences. There is a detail often missed when people imagine early survival. Shelters were rarely built to block all cold. Total enclosure trapped damp air, breath, and condensation. Instead, temporary windbreaks were favored. Leaning branches, low stone walls, hide screens angled just enough to redirect airflow. You can picture it now. Cold passes around you instead of through you. Modern researchers studying ancient settlement patterns often note how consistent these choices are across regions. From Ice Age Europe to Northern Asia, people favored locations that balanced exposure and protection. This consistency suggests shared understanding rather than coincidence. Comfort was not the goal. Manageability was. You notice how the wind sounds different as it moves across the land. It whistles along ridges, sighs through grass, and falls nearly silent in shallow dips. Early humans listened for these changes. Wind carried information. A rising howl meant weather turning. A sudden stillness could mean snow on the way. Sleeping in the wrong place could mean waking, buried, or frozen. There is an intriguing idea that some anthropologists explore. They suggest that early humans may have developed a kind of wind memory, an intuitive sense of how air moved through familiar landscapes across seasons. While difficult to prove, it would explain why certain camp locations were returned to year after year, even when other resources shifted. You step behind a cluster of rocks and feel immediate relief. Your shoulders drop slightly. Breathing slows. This is not shelter in a modern sense. There is no roof, no walls. Yet the difference is profound. Blocking even a small amount of wind reduces heat loss dramatically. The cold remains, but it no longer claws at you. Later societies would build thicker and thicker walls. Assuming more barrier always meant more warmth. Often, the opposite happened. Heavy stone trapped moisture. Cold crept inward slowly but relentlessly. Early humans avoided this mistake by staying adaptable. Shelters could be moved, adjusted, abandoned if conditions changed. You watch how others position themselves. No one stands directly facing the wind. Bodies angle slightly. Backs turn toward the strongest gusts. People sit low, reducing exposed surface area. These are not taught lessons. They are habits absorbed from watching others survive. A small, almost playful detail appears as you observe children. They run briefly into the wind, then retreat laughing into calmer air. This play teaches limits. It builds familiarity. Cold becomes something known rather than feared. Historians studying hunter-gatherer societies often note how children learn environmental awareness through play long before formal instruction. You look upward. Clouds move quickly. Wind pushes them faster than you expect. That tells you something important. Weather is changing. Maybe not tonight, but soon. Early humans watch skies with the same care modern people give to screens. The land offered warnings freely, if you learned how to read them. As night deepens, the group settles into a spot chosen carefully. Not the lowest point, where cold air pools. Not the highest, where wind scours relentlessly. Somewhere in between. Balanced. Thoughtful. The fire is placed with intention. Smoke drifts away rather than settling. Embers stay protected from sudden gusts. There is a debate among scholars about how permanent these locations were. Some argue that repeated use created semi-permanent camps. Others believe flexibility was the real strength, with groups moving often to follow favorable conditions. The truth likely sits between familiar places were valued, but never clung to blindly. You sit and feel the wind brush past your back, redirected by stone and earth. It reminds you that cold survival was not about resisting nature, but cooperating with it. You do not fight the wind. You step aside and let it pass. Later civilizations would forget this subtlety. Streets channeled wind into narrow corridors. Towers created turbulence. Buildings blocked sun while trapping drafts. People solved one problem while creating another. Early humans avoided that trap by keeping structures simple and temporary. You lie down briefly, testing the ground. It is firm but forgiving. Less wind here means less heat loss through contact. You pull a hide closer. Not tightly, just enough to reduce exposure. Everything remains adjustable. Nothing is fixed. That flexibility is the real shelter. There is a quiet satisfaction in choosing the right place. It feels earned. You do not feel protected by something external. You feel aligned. Cold still exists. Wind still moves, but you are no longer in its direct path. As your eyes grow heavy, you listen to the muted world around you. Wind hums above the rocks. Fire crackles softly behind you. Breath rises and falls steadily. This is how early humans lived with cold, not by building it out, but by stepping just far enough to the side. And as sleep approaches, you understand something deeply. Survival here is not about strength or toughness. It is about paying attention. The land tells you where to stand. You simply have to listen. You pull the hides closer now, not wrapping yourself tightly, but arranging them with care. Clothing here is not something you throw on and forget. It is something you manage constantly. Like fire or movement, every fold matters. Every gap has meaning. Early humans did not dress for appearance or comfort. They dressed for survival. And the cold shaped every choice. The first thing you notice is how alive these materials feel. Fur still holds the memory of the animal it came from. It bends, breathes, and shifts as you move. When you kneel, it compresses and traps warm air. When you stand, it loosens, releasing moisture before it can chill you. This is not accidental. Generations learned which hides worked best in which conditions. Archaeological finds from cold regions show scraping tools worn smooth by repeated hide processing. Skins were cleaned carefully, stretched, softened, and sometimes smoked. Smoking did more than preserve material. It made hides more resistant to moisture and decay. It also added a familiar scent that signaled warmth and safety. You smell it now faintly, mixed with ash and earth. There is broad agreement among researchers that early clothing was layered long before weaving existed. Inner layers focused on softness and warmth. Outer layers focused on wind and moisture. These layers were not sewn tightly like modern garments. They were tied, wrapped, and adjusted throughout the day. Tight clothing restricted movement and trapped sweat. Loose clothing allowed airflow and flexibility. You shift your shoulders and feel how the fur slides rather than grips. This matters more than you might expect. Rigid clothing steals energy. Flexible clothing works with your body instead of against it. Early humans understood this through experience, not theory. If a garment slowed you down or made you clumsy, it was abandoned. There is a detail that often surprises modern readers. Many early garments were worn with the fur facing inward, not outward. The fur trapped warm air close to the skin, while the hide side resisted wind and snow. This choice varied by environment, but it shows careful thinking rather than guesswork. Cold demanded experimentation. You notice how seams are placed. They avoid joints where movement is constant. Knees, elbows, shoulders are left free whenever possible. Stiff seams at these points caused wear, tearing, and discomfort. Clothing here follows the body's needs rather than forcing the body to conform. Some anthropologists suggest that early humans adjusted clothing continuously rather than dressing once for the day. You feel that now. When you move, you loosen a tie. When you rest, you pull a layer closer. This constant adjustment prevented overheating and sudden chilling. The cold was managed minute by minute. There is an ongoing discussion about how much clothing early humans truly needed. Some argue that biological adaptation reduced reliance on heavy garments. Others believe clothing was essential for survival in colder climates. The truth likely shifted with region and season. What is clear is that clothing was not a substitute for awareness. It was part of a system that included movement, fire, and shelter. You watch someone nearby repair a tear using sinew. The motion is slow and practiced. Sinew tightens when it dries, creating strong seams without stiffness. This knowledge mattered deeply. A torn garment in cold weather was not an inconvenience. It was a risk. Repairs were done early, before damage spread. Children wear smaller versions of the same clothing, often oversized to allow growth. Loose garments meant children could move freely and stay warm while learning through play. This choice reduced the need for frequent replacement and allowed families to adapt clothing over time. There is a lesser-known observation from ethnographic studies. Some groups deliberately avoided excessive clothing during mild cold to maintain tolerance. Overbundling weakened awareness and increased sweating. This practice echoes earlier habits of exposure and balance. Warmth was earned through behavior, not hoarded through layers alone. You lift the edge of a hide and feel moisture escape. Breath, sweat, and melting frost all produce dampness. Early clothing designs prioritized drying as much as insulation. Hides were shaken, aired, and rotated. Wet garments were dangerous. Dry ones could save lives. Later civilizations would replace hides with woven fabrics and tailored shapes. These brought advantages, but also new problems. Fabrics absorbed moisture more readily. Tight fits restricted circulation. Fashion introduced priorities unrelated to survival. Warmth became something you assumed rather than managed. Standing here, wrapped in fur that smells faintly of smoke and animal oil, you feel grounded. This clothing connects you directly to food, labor, and environment. Nothing is abstract. Every layer has a story. Every stitch represents time spent preparing for cold rather than reacting to it. There is evidence that some early groups decorated clothing subtly, using patterns cut into hide or small ornaments sewn along edges. These details did not reduce function. They reinforced identity. Warmth and meaning coexisted. Cold did not erase culture. It shaped it. You sit and adjust the layers one last time before resting. Nothing pinches. Nothing binds. Your body remains ready to move if needed. This readiness is the point. Clothing here supports life without demanding attention. As sleep approaches, you realize something important. Early humans survived cold not because they had better clothing in a technical sense, but because they understood clothing as a living system. It worked only when combined with awareness, movement, and care. You close your eyes, feeling warmth held gently rather than trapped. The cold remains outside, patient as ever. But between your skin and the night, knowledge rests quietly, wrapped around you in fur and habit. You begin to notice something subtle as the night stretches on. Even while resting, no one is truly still. Bodies shift, legs straighten, then bend again. Shoulders roll slowly, hands flex and relax without conscious thought. In this world, motion does not stop when work ends. It simply becomes quieter, slower, almost meditative. Constant movement is not exercise here. It is warmth. Cold punishes stillness more reliably than it punishes effort. Early humans learned this quickly. Standing frozen in place drained heat far faster than gentle motion ever did. You feel it yourself. When you pause too long, a chill creeps into joints. When you move again, warmth returns, spreading from muscle to skin like a low tide, reversing direction. Evidence from skeletal remains shows well-developed muscle attachment points, even in individuals who lived relatively short lives. This suggests bodies that were used constantly, not strained in bursts, but engaged throughout the day and night. Heat production came not from intense labor alone, but from continuous low-level activity. The body stayed awake even when the mind rested. You shift your weight and squat briefly, then rise again. It feels natural, almost comforting. Early humans spent much of their time close to the ground, squatting, kneeling, rising, leaning. These movements activated large muscle groups without exhausting them. Blood circulated efficiently. Joints stayed flexible. Cold found fewer weak points. There is a detail that surprises many modern observers. Rest did not mean lying flat for long periods. Prolonged stillness was risky in cold conditions. Instead, rest came in waves. A few minutes of stillness, followed by a stretch, a change in position, a brief walk to the fire. This pattern kept heat production steady without draining energy reserves. Some researchers suggest that early humans may have had a higher baseline activity level even during sleep. Micro-movements, small adjustments, and frequent awakenings prevented body temperature from dropping too far. While it is difficult to measure this directly, Similar patterns appear in modern groups living outdoors in cold climates. Sleep remains lighter, but survival improves. You notice how children move. They never sit quietly for long. They fidget, shift, stand, crouch, wonder. What might look like restlessness in a modern classroom is valuable behavior here. Movement keeps them warm. It teaches awareness. It prevents numbness. Adults do not scold this. They understand its purpose instinctively. There is an often overlooked observation in historical studies of later settled societies. As people began sleeping in beds and sitting in chairs, movement decreased sharply. Furniture encouraged stillness. Stillness encouraged heat loss. Cold, once managed through motion, now had to be fought through insulation and fire alone. You stretch your arms slowly overhead. Muscles respond easily. There is no stiffness yet. Early humans rarely experienced the deep joint stiffness common today. Constant motion lubricated joints naturally. Cold could stiffen, but movement reversed it quickly. The body remained responsive. There is a quiet disagreement among scholars about whether early humans burned more calories overall or simply distributed effort more evenly. Some argue that constant low-level movement increased energy demand significantly. Others believe efficiency improved over time, balancing intake and output. What matters here is not the number, but the pattern. Heat came from continuity rather than intensity. You walk a short circle around the resting area, not because you need to go anywhere, but because motion feels right. Others do the same at different moments. Paths form naturally, shallow arcs worn into earth or snow. These paths are not planned. They emerge from repeated warmth-seeking behavior. There is a small but telling detail visible in ancient campsites. Ground near hearths is often more compacted than surrounding areas, marked by countless small movements rather than heavy traffic. This suggests people did not simply sit and stare at fire. They circled it. They approached and retreated. They rotated positions constantly. Later cultures would romanticize stillness as rest. They would associate calm with immobility. Here, calm comes from rhythm. Movement slows the mind rather than agitating it. You feel that now. Each shift releases tension. Each stretch resets awareness. There is a theory that early humans developed superior proprioception, an internal sense of body position, because survival demanded it. Cold made clumsiness dangerous. Falling could mean injury. Injury in winter could mean death. Constant movement trained balance, coordination, and awareness simultaneously. You lower yourself to the ground again, but this time on your side. Knees bent, spine curved slightly. It feels warmer than lying flat. Less surface area meets cold earth. You tuck hands near your chest. This position is not chosen for comfort alone. It conserves heat efficiently. You notice how breathing syncs with movement. Inhale as you stretch. Exhale as you curl inward. This rhythm is calming. It also regulates temperature. Breath becomes a tool rather than an afterthought. There is a lesser discussed idea that cold tolerance improved not only through physical adaptation, but through familiarity with discomfort. Movement made discomfort temporary rather than threatening. A chill could be shaken off. Numbness could be reversed. Panic had no place here, because solutions were immediate and embodied. Later, societies would lose this intimacy with their bodies. Cold would arrive as a shock. Stiffness would linger. Movement would feel optional rather than essential. People would wait for warmth to return instead of creating it themselves. You rise once more, quietly, and walk toward the edge of the resting area. The night air brushes your face. Cold remains present, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels manageable. Your body knows what to do. As you return to the fire and settle again, you realize something simple and profound. Early humans did not survive cold by resting harder. They survived by moving gently, endlessly, without drama. Motion was warmth. Stillness was risk. Your eyes close for a moment. Muscles remain awake. The body hums softly with life. Cold waits patiently beyond the firelight. But it no longer dominates the night. Movement has claimed its place as the quiet guardian of warmth. You feel the closeness before you fully notice it. Bodies are nearer now. Not crowded. Not uncomfortable. But arranged with intention. Heat gathers quietly between shoulders, backs, and knees. This is not affection in a modern sense. It is cooperation. In cold environments, distance costs warmth. Proximity gives it back. Early humans rarely slept alone in winter. That is not speculation. Across many cold climate cultures studied in more recent times, shared sleeping remained common until very late in history. Archaeological evidence suggests small groups clustered tightly at night, often arranged in arcs or circles rather than lines. This allowed warmth to circulate while still leaving space for movement and fire tending. You sit close enough to feel another person's breath warm the air near your shoulder. It is subtle, but it matters. A single human body radiates a surprising amount of heat. Multiply that by 5 or 6, and the difference becomes meaningful. Cold loses its sharp edge. Muscles relax without fully letting go. There is a small but revealing detail noted by researchers studying ancient camp patterns. Sleeping areas often show overlapping impressions rather than distinct individual spots. This suggests people shifted closer as the night cooled, adjusting positions together rather than staying fixed. Warmth here is shared, negotiated moment by moment. You notice how bodies are arranged deliberately. Larger adults often take outer positions, shielding children or elders from drafts. This is not commanded. It emerges naturally. Those with more mass lose heat more slowly. Those with less are protected. Cold shapes social roles quietly, without speeches or rules. There is a tendency in modern imagination to see early human groups as emotionally distant or purely practical. Yet this closeness required trust. You cannot press your back against someone you do not trust. You cannot sleep lightly beside someone you fear. Cold, selected for cooperation as much as strength. You listen to breathing around you. It forms a soft, uneven rhythm. Someone exhales slowly. Someone else shifts and sighs. These sounds are reassuring. Silence can mean danger. Breathing means life continues. Warmth is present. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies often observe that shared sleep strengthens social bonds more effectively than shared meals. Nighttime vulnerability creates reliance. Cold amplifies this effect, when survival depends on others staying near. Relationships matter deeply. You feel a hand rest briefly against your arm as someone adjusts position. It is not intimate. It is practical. Skin contact transfers heat efficiently. Even brief contact can restore warmth to chilled fingers. This technique is simple and effective. Yet later cultures would often avoid it due to changing social norms. There is an ongoing discussion among scholars about whether early humans developed stronger social cohesion, partly because of environmental pressures like cold. Some argue that cooperation would have emerged regardless. Others point out that cold punishes isolation quickly. The truth likely lies in between. Environment does not create values, but it reinforces behaviors that work. You tuck your knees closer to your chest, mirroring others nearby. This reduces exposed surface area and brings vital organs inward. The group adjusts together, like a single organism finding its most efficient shape. Children settle easily here. They lean into warmth without hesitation. There is no concept of personal space as something sacred and separate. Space is flexible. It expands in summer and contracts in winter. Cold teaches this lesson early. You notice how sleep comes differently when bodies are close. It is lighter, but calmer. You drift. Wake briefly. Drift again. Each small movement is answered by the warmth of others nearby. This pattern prevents deep heat loss while allowing rest. Later, civilizations would gradually separate sleeping spaces. Walls would divide families. Beds would isolate bodies. Privacy would increase, but warmth would suffer. Cold nights indoors would become strangely lonelier than nights outdoors ever were. There is a curious observation from historical accounts of early explorers encountering indigenous cold climate groups. Many were surprised by how little fire was used at night compared to expectations. Shared body heat did much of the work, fire supported, but did not replace human closeness. You feel that now. The fire has softened. Embers glow quietly. Yet you are not cold. Heat circulates gently through the group. Cold remains outside the ring of bodies. There is a small psychological effect that comes with this arrangement. Fear diminishes. Cold often brings anxiety because it feels isolating. Here, isolation is rare. Even if danger approaches, it approaches many, not one. That shared risk calms the mind. You adjust your position slightly, careful not to disrupt others. They adjust in response. This quiet coordination happens without words. Bodies communicate through pressure, warmth, and movement. Some researchers suggest that early humans may have had higher tolerance for physical closeness because it was necessary. Modern discomfort with proximity may be cultural rather than biological. Cold shaped expectations differently. As the night deepens, breathing slows across the group. Muscles soften, but never fully disengage. Warmth holds steady. Cold waits beyond reach. Patient as ever. You close your eyes and feel the simple truth of it settle in. Early humans did not face cold alone. They faced it together. Shared warmth was not a luxury. It was a strategy. And as sleep draws nearer, you sense how this closeness, practical and quiet, gave early humans an advantage that later, more isolated societies would slowly forget. Sleep arrives differently here. It does not fall like a curtain. It drifts in, pose, then drifts out again. Your eyes close, but awareness lingers. Cold has taught the body not to disappear completely. You rest, but you listen. You sleep, but you remain lightly tethered to the world around you. Early humans rarely experienced the kind of deep, uninterrupted sleep many people expect today. Nights were broken into segments, short stretches of rest, followed by brief waking moments. This pattern was not a flaw, it was protection. Cold nights demanded vigilance. Fires needed checking. Weather could change without warning. A body that slept lightly survived longer. You feel this rhythm settle into you now. You curl inward. Rest for a while. Then steer. A shift of weight. A stretch of fingers. A quiet glance at the embers. Each movement brings warmth back into muscles before cold can settle too deeply. Sleep here is cooperative, shared across the group like a watch that passes quietly from one person to the next. Evidence from later historical periods, long after agriculture began, suggests that segmented sleep remained common well into the medieval era. People slept in two phases, waking naturally in between. In colder conditions, this pattern made even more sense. Early humans likely followed a similar rhythm long before it had a name. You notice how the ground feels beneath you, firm, but not hostile. You chose this spot carefully earlier, away from wind and pooled cold air. Even so, contact with earth draws heat slowly. To counter this, you shift positions often, rolling slightly onto one side, tucking a foot beneath a thigh. Each change interrupts heat loss. There is a small detail uncovered in studies of modern outdoor sleepers in cold environments. Those who adjust position frequently maintain higher core temperatures than those who remain still, even when equally insulated. Early humans learned this lesson without measuring tools. The body taught it directly. Your breathing changes as you drift in and out of rest. It becomes shallower, then deepens again when you stir. This cycle helps regulate temperature. Shallow breathing conserves warmth. Deeper breaths follow movement, fueling muscles as heat production resumes. You listen to the sounds of sleep around you. Soft exhales, a low murmur as someone turns, a brief cough. These sounds reassure. Silence would be more alarming. Sound means people are warm enough to breathe steadily. Children sleep closest to the center of the group. They wake more easily, but also fall back asleep quickly. Their bodies are smaller and lose heat faster. The group adjusts around them instinctively. Someone shifts closer. A hide is pulled gently over small shoulders. No one announces these actions. They happen without thought. There is a discussion among sleep researchers about whether lighter sleep is actually more restorative in harsh environments. While modern science often prioritizes deep sleep stages, survival contexts reward responsiveness. Early humans balanced rest with readiness. Exhaustion was dangerous, but so was unconsciousness. You wake briefly and look toward the sky. Stars remain sharp and unmoving. Clouds have not arrived yet. That tells you something. Weather is holding. You relax again, letting eyes close. Later civilizations would associate good sleep with separation. Private rooms, thick walls, doors closed. Yet cold often crept in regardless, leaving people isolated and restless. Early humans slept in exposed environments, yet felt held by proximity and rhythm. There is an overlooked observation from ethnographic accounts of Arctic and subarctic peoples. Many describe sleep as a social event rather than an individual one. People talk briefly, doze, wake, and talk again. This light interaction maintains warmth and morale. Cold nights feel shorter when they are shared. You sense time passing without tracking it. No clocks exist here. Darkness is not measured. Sleep is guided by body signals and environmental cues. When cold deepens slightly, you stir. When warmth returns, you drift again. Your muscles never fully relax. There is always a hint of readiness. This is not anxiety. It is adaptation. Cold trains the nervous system to stay gently alert without panic. You feel calm, even as awareness stays present. There is a lesser-known idea proposed by some anthropologists. They suggest that early humans may have experienced fewer sleep-related disorders because their patterns matched natural rhythms more closely. Exposure to darkness, movement, and temperature shifts regulated sleep cycles organically. While impossible to prove fully, the idea aligns with what you feel now. You shift closer to another body and feel warmth spread slowly across your side. This contact allows you to sleep longer before needing to move again. Shared warmth extends rest without sacrificing safety. Firelight flickers faintly through closed eyelids. Embers glow, then dim. Someone adds a small piece of fuel. Not enough to flare, just enough to sustain. The sound is soft and brief. Sleep continues uninterrupted. You realize that cold has shaped not just how people slept, but how they thought about sleep. It was not something you escaped into. It was something you entered carefully, with respect for the world beyond your eyelids. Later societies would chase deeper sleep through comfort and control. Yet even surrounded by walls and blankets, people would toss and turn, disconnected from natural rhythms. Early humans slept lightly, but they slept in harmony with their environment. You drift again, breathing slow and steady. The ground holds. Bodies surround you. Cold waits beyond reach. Patient and quiet. As rest settles deeper now, you understand that sleep itself was a survival skill, not something passive, but something learned. And in learning how to sleep with the cold rather than against it, early humans gained another quiet advantage over those who would come later. Morning does not arrive with warmth. It arrives with hunger. You feel it before you open your eyes. A steady pull from deep inside your body. Cold nights burn fuel quietly, even when movement is minimal. Early humans understood this connection well. Food was not only about strength or survival tomorrow, it was about heat right now. You sit up slowly, stretching muscles that stayed half awake through the night. The cold feels sharper before eating. Fingers are a little stiff. Breath looks thicker in the air. This is expected. The body has spent hours keeping itself alive on stored energy. Now it wants replenishment. There is strong agreement among researchers that early cold climate diets were dense and rich in fat. Animal fat, marrow, organs, and oily fish provided more than calories. They produced long-lasting internal warmth. Unlike carbohydrates, which burn quickly, fat releases energy slowly. This steady burn mattered during long, cold stretches when movement was limited. You picture food being prepared nearby. Not elaborate meals. Not decorative plates. Simple. Intentional choices. A piece of roasted meat. Cracked bones yielding marrow. Fat dripped into embers. Sizzling softly. The smell is rich and grounding. It tells your body what is coming before the first bite. There is a detail often overlooked in discussions of ancient diets. Protein alone does not keep you warm. Too much lean meat without fat can actually worsen cold stress. This is sometimes referred to as protein poisoning in extreme cases. Early humans learned quickly that fat was essential. Eating patterns adjusted seasonally to ensure enough of it. You take a bite and feel warmth begin, not at the skin, but deep in your core. Digestion itself produces heat. This effect is known today as the thermic effect of food, though early humans needed no name for it. They felt the result directly. After eating, fingers grow more responsive. Toes regain sensation. Cold retreats slightly. Some anthropologists suggest that early humans timed their largest meals deliberately around cold exposure. Eating before long rest periods or before travel in harsh weather provided internal insulation. This strategy appears again and again in cold-adapted cultures across history. You notice how food is shared. No one eats alone. Portions are balanced carefully. Children and elders receive attention first. This is not charity. It is survival logic. Smaller bodies lose heat faster. Protecting them protects the group's future. There is an ongoing debate about how frequently early humans ate during winter. Some argue that food scarcity forced long fasting periods. Others point to evidence of frequent small meals. The truth likely varied by region and season. What remains clear is that eating was closely tied to managing cold rather than rigid schedules. You lick grease from your fingers without hesitation. Cleanliness here serves warmth. Fat on skin offers slight protection against wind and moisture. Some groups even rubbed animal fat directly onto exposed skin. This practice reduced evaporative heat loss and prevented cracking. While not universal, it appears in multiple cold climate traditions. There is a lesser-known observation from early European explorers encountering indigenous northern peoples. Many noted the surprisingly high fat content of their diets and the visible discomfort these groups felt when forced onto low-fat rations. Warmth faded. Energy dropped. Cold became dangerous again. You chew slowly, letting digestion do its work. The body responds almost immediately. A gentle warmth spreads outward. Muscles relax without losing readiness. This internal fire complements the external one tended through the night. Later, agricultural societies shifted toward grain-based diets. These provided reliable calories, but less sustained warmth. In winter, people often felt cold even indoors. Fires burned constantly, yet bodies remained chilled. The internal fuel was different. You stand and move a little after eating. Movement helps distribute heat. Blood carries warmth from digestion to fingers and toes. This habit becomes automatic. Eating and moving are linked actions. There is also the matter of hydration. Cold reduces thirst, but dehydration worsens cold stress. Early humans consumed fluids through broths, melted snow, and water drawn from unfrozen sources. Warm liquids provided both hydration and heat. You feel the comfort of it as you sip slowly. Some researchers suggest that early humans may have consumed more salt than modern diets, especially in cold regions. Salt supports circulation and nerve function. While evidence is limited, it aligns with practices seen in later cold-adapted cultures. You watch others eat and notice restraint. No overeating. Excess digestion produces sweat, which chills quickly. Balance is maintained. enough fuel to warm the body without overwhelming it. Food here is not separated from survival planning. It is part of temperature management. What you eat, when you eat, and how you eat all matter. As the meal ends, you feel steadier. Cold still exists. Wind still moves. But inside, warmth holds. This inner stability allows early humans to face cold days without constant fear. Later civilizations would separate food from environment. Eating became scheduled, social, symbolic. Warmth became external, supplied by buildings and clothing. Internal heat production lost its central role. You wipe your hands and stand fully now. Energy hums beneath your skin. The day ahead may be cold, but your body is ready. Heat no longer feels fragile. As you step forward, you understand something quietly profound. Early humans survived cold, not only by protecting themselves from it, but by feeding the fire within, and that internal warmth, steady and reliable, carried them through nights and seasons that later societies would struggle to endure. The cold no longer feels like something you are fighting. It feels more like something you are listening to. As the day unfolds, you notice how your attention stays tuned outward, always checking in with the air, the ground, and your own body. Discomfort is not ignored, but it is not dramatized either. It is information. Early humans lived with discomfort as a teacher. Cold skin meant it was time to move. Numb fingers meant it was time to change position or add a layer. Shivering meant energy was running low. None of these signals were treated as failures. They were messages, clear and immediate. You pause and notice how quickly your body responds when you listen. A few steps restore warmth. A shift of clothing reduces heat loss. A change in posture blocks the wind. Cold rarely had time to become dangerous because it was addressed early. Later civilizations would dull this sensitivity, often waiting too long before responding. There is strong evidence that early humans developed heightened bodily awareness simply because survival demanded it. Pain and discomfort were not distractions from daily life. They were part of it. Cold sharpened this awareness rather than overwhelming it. You feel the difference between discomfort and danger clearly now. Discomfort is manageable. It motivates action. Danger arrives only when discomfort is ignored. This distinction matters. Modern people often panic at the first sign of cold because they are unused to listening to it calmly. There is an interesting observation from studies of modern cold-adapted communities. Individuals who grow up exposed to cold often describe it as neutral rather than hostile. Cold becomes a background condition, not an emergency. Early humans likely shared this perspective. Their emotional response to cold was quieter. You walk along a familiar path and notice how the cold changes with the terrain. A shaded area feels sharper. A sunlit patch feels forgiving. These variations guide your movement. You linger where warmth gathers. You pass quickly through draining areas. This behavior is subtle, but constant. Later societies would flatten landscapes, pave them, and build uniform spaces. Cold would feel the same everywhere. Removing these cues, without variation, awareness faded. People stopped adjusting and started enduring instead. There is a detail often missed in discussions of early survival. Cold tolerance is not about ignoring discomfort. It is about responding early and often. You never let the cold build momentum. Small adjustments prevent large problems. You stop briefly and listen. Wind has shifted slightly. That tells you something about the coming hours. Clouds are thinning. The cold tonight may be sharper. This information settles into your planning without conscious effort. You will eat a little more. You will stay closer to others. You will tend the fire longer. Some researchers propose that early humans developed a different relationship with stress because of this constant feedback loop. Challenges like cold were ongoing but manageable. Stress came in small doses rather than overwhelming bursts. The nervous system adapted accordingly. You feel calm despite the conditions. Cold has not disappeared, but fear has. This emotional steadiness matters. Panic wastes energy. Calm conserves it. There is a lesser-known observation from psychological studies of outdoor survival. People who remain curious about discomfort perform better than those who resent it. Early humans had no alternative but curiosity. Cold was something to understand, not something to escape. You touch the ground again, feeling temperature through your palm. It tells you how long you can stay here. It tells you where to sit later. This tactile information becomes second nature. Later civilizations would insulate themselves from these signals. Shoes thickened. Floors separated bodies from earth. Heating erased variation. People stopped feeling the world directly. When cold broke through, it felt shocking and dangerous. You adjust your pace as the day continues. Movement matches temperature. Faster when cold sharpens. Slower when warmth returns. This constant calibration keeps your body balanced. There is an ongoing discussion about whether early humans experienced less chronic stress despite harsher conditions. Some evidence suggests they did. Their challenges were immediate and solvable. Cold could be answered with action. Modern stress often has no clear solution. You notice how others around you respond similarly. No one complains about cold. Complaints waste breath. Instead, people act. A layer added. A fire fed. A path changed. This culture of response replaces a culture of complaint. As the sun lowers again, you feel prepared. Cold is no longer surprising. It has been present all day. Teaching quietly. You have listened. You realize now that early humans survived cold better, not because they suffered more, but because they paid attention sooner. Cold was never ignored long enough to become deadly. As evening approaches, you move with confidence rather than dread. The night will be cold, but you already know what to do. And that knowledge, learned through constant dialogue with discomfort, is one of the greatest advantages early humans ever had. You begin to notice how the year itself feels different when you live this way. Seasons are not background scenery. They are active forces that guide where you go, when you move, and how long you stay. Cold is rarely faced head-on for months at a time. Instead, it is anticipated, approached, and then eased away from through careful movement across the land. Early humans did not anchor themselves to one place and demand that it provide everything year-round. They followed patterns older than memory. When temperatures dropped beyond what daily habits could manage comfortably, movement began. Not hurried flight, but deliberate travel, timed with changes in light, wind, and animal behavior. Archaeological evidence from many regions shows repeated seasonal routes rather than permanent winter settlements during the coldest periods. Camps appear, disappear, then reappear generations later in the same sequence. This suggests people remembered where winter was gentler and where cold became dangerous. Knowledge lived in stories, habits, and shared memory. You feel this logic in your body now. Staying put forever feels wrong. The cold deepens slowly as weeks pass. Fuel becomes harder to gather. Food shifts. Rather than exhausting a place, you leave before conditions demand desperation. This choice preserves strength and morale. There is a widely accepted view among researchers that mobility was one of the strongest cold survival tools early humans possessed. Moving allowed people to avoid extremes rather than endure them. Later civilizations would reverse this logic, staying fixed and fighting winter with walls, stored food, and fuel. You walk along a familiar route and notice landmarks that mark seasonal change. A bend in the river that freezes earlier than others. A grove of trees that blocks winter winds but traps summer heat. These markers guide timing. You do not wait for cold to become unbearable. You move when it begins to ask harder questions. Animals offer signals as well. You see herds shift direction, birds thin out, tracks change patterns. Early humans watched these signs closely. Animals survive cold by moving too. Ignoring their behavior would have been foolish. There is a lesser-known detail from studies of hunter-gatherer societies. Seasonal movement reduced illness. Staying too long in one place allowed waste. Moisture, and disease to build up. Cold combined with illness was deadly. Movement broke that cycle. You packed lightly. Possessions are few. Everything you carry must justify its weight. Heavy objects drain energy. Energy is warmth. This understanding keeps movement efficient. Later civilizations would accumulate belongings, tying themselves physically and emotionally to place. When winter came, they stayed and endured, often at great cost. Early humans chose flexibility instead. You feel the ground change beneath your feet as elevation shifts. Cold pools in low areas. Higher ground offers better airflow. You adjust route accordingly. Even small changes in elevation can alter temperature and wind exposure. These details guide decisions quietly. There is ongoing discussion among scholars about how far early humans traveled seasonally. Some evidence suggests long migrations. Other evidence points to smaller, local circuits. What matters is not distance, but timing. Movement happened before cold became a crisis. You stop briefly and feel the sun on your face. Its angle is lower now. Days shorten. This too signals change. Early humans read the sun as carefully as the land. Light loss meant planning began. There is a small but telling observation from ethnographic records. Groups that moved seasonally often experienced less anxiety around winter. Winter was expected, prepared for, and then partially avoided. Fear diminished when choice remained. You imagine later farmers watching winter approach, with no option to move. Fields tied them down. Stores determined survival. Cold became something to endure rather than navigate. Here, movement keeps cold from dominating. You are rarely forced to face the harshest conditions. You meet cold on your own terms, then step aside when it grows demanding. As evening approaches, you settle briefly, knowing this place is temporary. Fires burn smaller. Shelters are lighter. Nothing suggests permanence. This mindset keeps you adaptable. You rest and feel satisfaction not from staying warm, but from staying ahead. Cold has not beaten you. You have simply chosen where to meet it. As sleep comes, you understand that early humans survived cold better because they refused to be trapped by it. Movement kept options open, and in a world shaped by winter, options were everything. As the day progresses, you reach for tools without thinking about them. They are simple, familiar, shaped by hands that understood cold intimately. There is no unnecessary complexity here. Every object must work when fingers are stiff and attention is divided. Cold forgives nothing that demands precision. You grip a stone scraper and feel how its edge fits naturally against your palm. There are no sharp angles pressing into skin. Tools like this were shaped not just to cut or scrape, but to be held comfortably for long periods in low temperatures. Evidence from ancient tool collections shows rounded grips and balanced weight, especially in regions with harsh winters. You notice how few tools there are. Each one serves multiple purposes. A blade cuts, scrapes, pries, and drills. A stick becomes a lever, a walking aid, or a fire poker. Carrying less means moving more easily. Ease of movement preserves warmth. There is a widely accepted observation among archaeologists that early tools favored reliability over efficiency. A tool that worked every time in cold conditions was more valuable than one that worked perfectly only in ideal circumstances. Cold made fine tolerances unreliable. Simple designs endured. You try a small task with numb fingers and appreciate how forgiving the tool is. It does not slip easily. It does not require forceful grip. Even when coordination dulls slightly, the tool cooperates. This cooperation mattered deeply. There is a small detail that rarely receives attention. Many early tools show wear patterns, indicating use by both hands. Ambidexterity reduced strain and kept circulation balanced. Switching hands prevented one side from chilling excessively. Cold encouraged symmetry. You watch others work and notice how tasks are broken into short sessions. A few minutes of cutting, then movement. A pause to warm hands near the fire. Work rhythms are shaped by temperature, not clocks. This pacing keeps mistakes low and injuries rare. Later civilizations would introduce specialized tools that demanded precision and long focus. In cold workshops, these tools failed more often. Fingers numbed. Accidents increased. Early humans avoided this trap by keeping tools adaptable. There is an ongoing discussion among researchers about whether tool design influenced migration into colder regions. Some argue that better tools enabled expansion. Others suggest expansion forced tool innovation. The relationship likely flowed both ways. Cold-shaped objects and objects-shaped possibility. You lift a heavier tool and notice how its weight warms your arm slightly as you move it. Muscle engagement produces heat. Tools were not made lighter than necessary. They needed enough mass to work efficiently without exhausting the user. Balance mattered more than minimal weight. There is an overlooked observation from ethnographic studies of cold climate craftspeople. Many prefer tools that work well with gloves or mitts. Early humans had no gloves in the modern sense, but they understood the same principle. Tools had to be usable with reduced sensitivity. You notice how edges are maintained. Dull tools require more force, which increases sweating and fatigue. Sharp tools cut quickly and allow rest. Cold punishes inefficiency. Maintenance is not optional. There is a quieter point often missed. Tools also reduce exposure time. Efficient processing means less time standing still in cold air. Shorter tasks preserve warmth. This efficiency supports survival more than speed alone. You finish your task and return the tool to a shared place. Nothing is hoarded. Tools circulate based on need. Sharing reduces duplication and weight. It also ensures that everyone stays productive and warm. Later societies would assign tools to individuals, creating dependency and hierarchy. Here, utility overrides ownership. Cold makes cooperation practical. As evening approaches, tools are cleaned and stored where they will not freeze into the ground or be buried by snow. Placement matters. Searching for a tool with numb fingers wastes heat and time. You sit and warm your hands, appreciating how the day's work never pushed you to exhaustion. The tools supported your body rather than demanding effort from it. As you rest, it becomes clear that early humans survived cold not by inventing complex machines, but by designing objects that respected human limits. Tools worked with cold hands, tired muscles, and shifting attention. In a world shaped by winter, simplicity was not primitive. It was intelligent. And as you settle into the quiet of evening, you understand how these humble objects helped keep warmth alive long after the fire dimmed. As time moves forward in your mind, something subtle begins to change. The cold itself has not grown harsher, but the way people meet it slowly shifts. You feel the difference as if stepping from open ground into a narrow passage. Movement becomes less fluid. Choices narrow. Comfort begins to take priority over awareness. And with that shift, something important is lost. You imagine the first solid walls rising. Permanent structures promise safety. They block wind, hold fire, and protect stored food. At first, they feel like an obvious improvement. Fewer miles walked, less exposure to storms, a place to return to every night. Yet as you step inside one of these early buildings, you notice the air immediately. It is still, damp, heavy with breath and smoke. Archaeological evidence from early settled communities shows a rise in respiratory problems and joint stress compared to earlier mobile groups. Enclosed spaces trapped moisture. Cold seeped into stone and earth walls, lingering long after fires burned out. Warmth became uneven. One side of the room roasted while another chilled bones quietly. You sit near a wall and feel it draw heat from your back. Stone holds cold well. Unlike open land, it releases that cold slowly. People built thicker walls, hoping for insulation, but often created cold reservoirs instead. Fire had to burn constantly to compensate. There is a commonly accepted view among historians that early settlements increased survival through food stability and population growth. This is true, but stability came with trade-offs. Cold was no longer met through movement and adaptation. It was confronted through resistance. Walls versus winter. Fire versus dampness. Control replaced cooperation. You notice how bodies change in these spaces. People sit longer. Work becomes repetitive and localized. Fields demand hours of stillness. Craft work anchors hands and eyes to one place. Muscles soften. Circulation slows. Cold creeps in quietly. There is a small but telling observation in skeletal records. Agricultural populations often show reduced bone density and muscle attachment compared to their nomadic predecessors. Less movement meant less internal heat production. Warmth shifted from something generated to something supplied. You walk through a village and feel how cold behaves differently here. Narrow paths channel wind. Buildings cast long shadows that block sun. Smoke lingers near ground level. Cold pockets form unpredictably. Unlike open land, where cold patterns are readable, settled spaces distort signals. People respond by adding layers, burning more fuel, staying indoors longer. Each solution works partially, but none restore the fluid relationship with cold that existed before. Awareness dulls. Discomfort becomes background noise rather than instruction. There is debate among scholars about whether early farmers were actually less healthy overall despite producing more food. Cold-related illness appears more frequently in records. Pneumonia, joint inflammation, and chronic fatigue rise. Cold, once managed through habit, now meets bodies less prepared to answer it. You step into a house at night and feel the strange loneliness of indoor cold. Fire glows, but only within reach. Beyond its light, chill settles. Bodies separate into rooms. Sleep becomes solitary. Warmth becomes personal rather than shared. This shift changes behavior subtly. People stop moving at night. Beds encourage stillness. Stillness encourages heat loss. More coverings are added, but they cannot replace shared body heat or constant micro-movement. You notice how fear of cold increases even as protection improves. People worry about drafts. They complain of chill. Cold becomes something resented rather than understood. Emotional response changes alongside physical one. There is a lesser discussed idea that comfort itself can weaken resilience. When bodies expect steady warmth, they react poorly to variation. A small draft feels dramatic. A cold morning feels unbearable. Early humans rarely expected perfect warmth, so variation did not shock them. You think of later civilizations layering solution upon solution. Thicker walls, larger fires, eventually furnaces, chimneys, and insulation. Each advancement solves one problem while introducing another. Fire safety, air quality, resource depletion. Cold becomes an enemy, requiring constant defense. Standing between these worlds, you sense the trade. Early humans lived with fewer protections, but greater adaptability. Later societies gained stability, but lost flexibility. Cold found new ways in. As you leave the village and return in memory to open land, you feel your body respond. Breathing deepens. Movement resumes. Cold feels clearer again. Less confused. The lesson settles gently. Survival is not only about building barriers. It is about preserving the skills that let you respond when barriers fail. Early humans survived cold better not because they were tougher, but because their lives never let them forget how to listen. You remain within the settled world a little longer now, long enough to feel how deeply agriculture reshapes the experience of cold. The land no longer responds to you. You respond to it. Fields demand attention at fixed times, regardless of weather. Crops wait for no one. When winter arrives, it does not arrive as a signal to move, but as an obstacle to endure. You stand at the edge of a field after harvest. The soil is bare. Wind sweeps across it without interruption. There are no trees left to slow it, no tall grasses to soften its force. Clearing land for farming removes many of the natural wind breaks early humans once relied on. Cold gains speed and reach. People stay anyway. They must. Seeds are in the ground. Stores are in cellars. Animals are penned nearby. Leaving is no longer an option. Cold becomes something faced day after day in the same place, even as it grows harsher. There is broad agreement among historians that agriculture tied communities to specific locations more tightly than any previous way of life. This stability supported population growth, but it also meant people faced local winters in full, rather than sidestepping the worst of them through seasonal movement. You feel the change in your body. Days are longer and more repetitive. Bending, planting, harvesting, grinding. These tasks build endurance, but not the constant varied motion that once kept heat flowing. Work happens in fixed postures. Knees stay bent. Hands repeat the same movement for hours. Circulation slows in the cold. During winter, agricultural labor does not stop completely. Animals need care. Tools need repair. Food must be processed. Much of this work happens indoors or near structures, where cold behaves differently. Dampness settles in. Smoke hangs low. Fires burn often, but unevenly. You step into a storage space dug into the ground. It smells of earth and grain. It is cold, but steady. People spend time here preserving food. The cold seeps slowly through stone and soil, numbing fingers without sharp warning. This kind of cold is deceptive. It drains heat quietly. There is evidence from early farming communities that winter malnutrition was common, even when food stores existed. Grain fills the stomach, but it does not always sustain warmth the way fat-rich diets once did. People feel full, yet remain cold. You notice how clothing changes too. Fabrics replace hides. Woven garments look orderly and familiar, but they absorb moisture easily. When damp, they cling to skin and steal heat. Drying them takes time and fuel, both precious in winter. Fire becomes central again, but in a different way. Instead of moving with it, people build life around it. Hearths anchor rooms. Everyone gathers close. Those farther away feel the chill. Warmth becomes uneven and competitive. You sense frustration in this arrangement. Cold is no longer something everyone knows how to answer individually. It becomes a shared problem managed by infrastructure rather than habit. When firewood runs low, anxiety rises. When smoke fills rooms, eyes burn and lungs ache. There is ongoing debate about whether early agricultural societies were actually more vulnerable to cold-related illness than their nomadic predecessors. Skeletal evidence suggests higher rates of joint degeneration and respiratory stress. Cold indoors, combined with poor air quality, strained bodies differently than open exposure ever had. You lie down at night in a fixed bed. It feels comfortable at first. Soft, familiar, but stillness sets in quickly. Heat drains into bedding and floor. You pull coverings closer, but movement is limited. Sleep becomes deeper, but colder. The body forgets some of its old habits, shifting less, listening less, responding later. Cold gains time to settle before action is taken. You imagine an early human from long ago stepping into this world. They would notice the quiet danger immediately. The way cold lingers, the way walls hide it until it reaches the bones, the way movement is discouraged. Later societies compensate by burning more fuel. Forests thin. Labor increases. The fight against cold becomes resource-intensive. Warmth depends on supply chains rather than awareness. You stand again at the field edge and feel the wind cut across open land. Agriculture has changed the landscape, the diet, the body, and the relationship with winter itself. The realization settles slowly. Early humans survived cold better because they could choose when and how to face it. Agriculture removed that choice. Cold did not grow stronger. People grew less able to avoid it. You begin to feel the weight of numbers now. More people, more mouths, more structures pressed together in one place. What once felt like shared warmth slowly transforms into shared risk. Cold behaves differently when bodies crowd together inside walls rather than moving freely across land. Early villages grow into towns. Towns swell into cities. Density promises safety and productivity. Yet winter finds new pathways here. Smoke thickens. Waste accumulates. Moisture settles into streets and foundations. Cold does not arrive cleanly. It mixes with dampness and sickness. You walk through a crowded settlement in winter. Fires burn everywhere. Yet the air feels heavy. Breath lingers. Coughs echo. Cold here does not bite sharply. It seeps. It lingers in joints. In lunks. In fatigue that never fully lifts. There is clear evidence from historical records that dense populations suffered more during cold seasons than smaller groups ever did. Epidemics peaked in winter. Illness spread easily in enclosed spaces where people could not separate. Cold weakened bodies just enough to give disease an opening. You notice how warmth becomes unevenly distributed. Those near fires stay comfortable. Those farther away shiver. Social hierarchy begins to affect survival directly. Access to fuel, food, and shelter determines how cold is experienced. Warmth is no longer shared by default. You watch people compete quietly for the best spots near hearths. Proximity becomes valuable. Children and elders are often pushed closer to heat, but not always successfully. Crowding limits flexibility. Someone must be cold so another can be warm. There is a pattern that appears again and again in records from early cities. Winter mortality spikes among the poor, not because cold is harsher for them, but because their ability to respond is limited. Less food, fewer layers, worse shelter. Cold becomes selective. You feel the psychological shift too. Cold is no longer a shared challenge met together. It becomes a private burden. People complain quietly. They withdraw. They endure rather than adapt. Resentment grows alongside chill. Movement, once a solution, now becomes restricted. Streets are narrow. Work is fixed. Space to walk freely is limited. Cold settles in bodies that cannot move enough to push it out. There is an observation from historians studying medieval cities. Despite thicker walls and more advanced heating methods, many urban residents felt colder than rural counterparts. Urban cold was damp, was stagnant, and persistent. Fire burned, but air quality suffered. Warmth came with a cost. You step into a workshop where artisans labor through winter. Hands stiffen, breath fogs. Precision work demands stillness. Mistakes increase as fingers numb. Cold slows productivity even as people work harder. Food changes too. Diets shift toward grains and preserved foods. Fat becomes scarcer for many. Internal warmth weakens. People eat enough to survive, but not enough to thrive against cold. You notice how sleep arrangements change. Shared sleeping fades. Separate rooms become common. Privacy increases. Warmth decreases. Bodies no longer pool heat naturally. Each person must rely on their own coverings and fuel. Cold nights feel longer here. Isolation amplifies discomfort. Early humans slept lightly but calmly together. Here, people sleep deeply but wake cold and stiff. There is an ongoing discussion among scholars about whether population density itself is a form of environmental stress. Cold magnifies that stress. Crowding reduces choice. Reduced choice increases vulnerability. You walk through a winter market and see fuel sold at high prices. Warmth becomes a commodity. Those who can afford it buy comfort. Those who cannot endure cold longer each night. Later civilizations build larger stoves, thicker clothing, more complex heating systems. These innovations help, but they also increase dependence. When systems fail, cold returns with greater force because habits of adaptation have faded. Standing in the center of this crowded winter world, you sense the irony. More people together should mean more shared warmth. Yet structure and hierarchy interfere. Cold finds cracks in organization. You remember earlier nights on open land. Bodies arranged with care. Movement constant. Attention sharp. Fewer people, but more coordination. Less control, but more responsiveness. The lesson settles quietly. Early humans survived cold better, not because they lived harsher lives, but because their small numbers allowed flexibility. Cold was met collectively and dynamically. Large societies met it rigidly. As you step away from the noise and into quieter memory, you feel the contrast clearly. Cold itself has not changed. Human organization has, and in that change, winter gained new power. You step into one of these early houses and feel the cold before you fully understand it. The air is still, heavy, carrying the faint smell of smoke and damp earth. Outside, the wind was sharp but honest. Here, the cold is quieter, more patient. It does not rush at you. It settles in and waits. Walls surround you now. They promise protection, yet they change how cold behaves. Stone and packed earth hold moisture. When breath meets cold air, the marv it condenses. You see it on walls. A faint darkening where warmth once touched. Over time, this moisture seeps inward, turning shelter into a slow drain on body heat. Archaeological remains of early houses often show signs of long-term dampness. Floors compacted by generations of feet hold moisture like sponges. Roofs drip slowly during thaws. Even with fire burning, humidity lingers. Cold plus dampness is a different threat altogether. It chills deeper and lasts longer. You sit near a wall and feel it pull warmth from your back. Stone absorbs heat readily. It does not give it back easily. Early builders learned to stack stones thickly, believing mass would insulate. In reality, it often created cold reservoirs that took days to warm fully, if they warmed at all. People respond by staying closer to the fire. Heat concentrates in one area. Beyond that circle, chill dominates. This creates zones inside the home. Warm here, cold there. Movement becomes limited. People huddle inward, sacrificing space for heat. There is evidence from early settlement sites that homes were often rebuilt or abandoned after winters of heavy dampness. Mold, rot, and illness followed moisture indoors. Cold did not kill directly. It weakened bodies slowly, making recovery harder. You notice how floors feel underfoot. Packed earth feels firm but cold. Straw or reeds help briefly, but compress quickly. Raised wooden floors are rare at first. Without separation from ground, heat drains continuously. Sleeping on such floors demands constant layering. Later improvements add platforms and benches. But these introduce new problems. Air circulation decreases. Moisture becomes trapped beneath. Cold hides where it cannot be seen. You breathe deeply and feel the air in your lungs. It feels thick. Smoke from the fire does not rise cleanly. It spreads along the ceiling, then settles. Eyes sting slightly. Lungs work harder. Fire warms. But it also pollutes. Cold indoors becomes inseparable from air quality. Historical accounts from much later periods describe houses where winter cold felt worse indoors than outside. Damp walls, stale air, and limited movement created an environment where heat never fully settled. People stepped outside to feel relief, even in freezing weather. You watch how people adapt. They line walls with hides. They hang fabrics to break drafts. They raise beds on frames. Each solution helps a little. None restore the clarity of cold felt outdoors. The house mediates temperature, but it also obscures feedback. There is a discussion among building historians about whether early architecture prioritized protection over health. Walls blocked wind and rain, but they also blocked drying sunlight and airflow. Cold became constant rather than variable. Constant cold wears the body down. You lie down in one of these houses at night. At first, it feels safer. The roof blocks the sky. The walls muffle sound. Yet as hours pass, cold creeps upward from floor and walls. Fire dims. Movement is discouraged. Sleep deepens. But warmth fades. The body responds by curling tighter, pulling layers close. Stillness increases. Circulation slows. Unlike outdoors, where shifting position quickly restores warmth. Here, the cold feels sticky. It lingers even after movement. You sense frustration in this environment. Cold feels harder to manage. The tools that once worked outside do not fully apply indoors. Awareness dulls because signals are muted. You feel cold, but you do not know where it comes from. People burn more fuel to compensate. Fires grow larger. Smoke thickens. Wood becomes scarce. Winter demands more labor just to maintain warmth. The cost of cold rises. There is evidence that early houses often collapsed or were intentionally dismantled after damp winters. Builders learned slowly through failure. Architecture evolved, but not without hardship. Cold taught lessons here too, but more harshly. You step back outside briefly and feel the difference immediately. Wind moves. Air clears. Cold feels sharper, but cleaner. Your body responds more easily. It knows what to do again. This contrast stays with you. Houses provided protection, but they also trapped what early humans once avoided. Dampness, stillness, and lingering cold replaced movement and variation. As settlements grew, people accepted this trade. Safety from predators and storms mattered. Yet winter indoors became a new challenge, one that required constant fuel and maintenance. You realize something quietly important. Early humans survived cold, better not because they lacked shelter, but because they knew when shelter helped and when it hurt. Open air, when chosen wisely, could be warmer than walls that trapped the wrong kind of cold. As night settles again, you stand at the threshold, feeling indoor chill behind you and outdoor cold ahead. One is sharp and readable. The other is dull and persistent. The difference explains much about how human life changed, and why winter grew harder for those who came later. You notice the fire is no longer where it once was. It has moved, not physically across the ground, but socially, emotionally, and structurally. In earlier nights, fire belonged to everyone equally. It sat in the open, demanded attention, and rewarded closeness. Now it is contained, controlled, assigned a place. And in that process, it changes the relationship people have with warmth. Inside settled homes, fire becomes fixed. A hearth, a pit, later, a stove. It is safer this way. People say, fewer sparks, less danger. Yet safety brings distance. You can no longer circle the fire freely. You cannot adjust your position as easily. Warmth becomes directional rather than shared. You sit near the hearth and feel heat on one side of your body while the other cools. Turning helps. But space is limited. Furniture blocks movement. Walls define where you can sit. Fire now warms objects as much as people. Stones, pots, beams absorb heat first, leaving bodies waiting. There is clear evidence in early household remains that fires burned for longer periods but produced less effective warmth for the people themselves. Heat rose upward or soaked into masonry. Fuel consumption increased. Efficiency dropped. Cold responded by lingering. You watch someone tend the fire. The task is no longer shared casually. It belongs to someone. A role emerges. Responsibility concentrates. If that person is tired, distracted, or absent, the fire suffers. Warmth becomes dependent on individual effort rather than collective awareness. In earlier camps, fire tending rotated naturally. People woke, moved, adjusted embers instinctively. Now, sleep deepens. Someone must be assigned to wake. Fire is no longer a companion. It is a chore. You feel the emotional shift this creates. Firelight once gathered people. Now, it divides space into useful and useless areas. The best seats are claimed. Others accept cooler corners. Hierarchy begins to shape warmth. There is an observation from historical studies of medieval homes. Even when fireplaces existed, many people slept far from them. Heat rarely reached upper floors or separate rooms. Fire became symbolic comfort rather than practical warmth for all. You notice how fire sounds different here. It is muffled, enclosed. Smoke struggles to escape. Chimneys improve this eventually. But early versions leak and draw poorly. Fire must burn hotter to compensate, using more fuel and producing more smoke. Cold responds quietly. It does not rush in. It settles into corners. Behind furniture. Beneath floors. Fire fights it unevenly. There is a subtle psychological change too. When fire is contained, people trust it to do the work for them. They move less. They wait for warmth rather than creating it through motion. This waiting allows cold to take hold. You remember earlier nights when fire encouraged movement. Approaching. Retreating. Rotating. Those habits kept bodies warm without effort. Here, fire encourages stillness. Stillness invites chill. Some historians note that as fire moved indoors and became controlled, people began to fear it more. Fire hazards increased. Rules formed. Children were warned away. Distance grew. Warmth became something you approached cautiously rather than lived beside. You see the irony. Fire was once dangerous because it demanded attention. Now it is dangerous because it is ignored or misused. Cold slips in during that neglect. There is debate among scholars about whether indoor fire truly improved winter survival in early settlements. While it reduced exposure to wind and rain, it introduced new risks. Smoke inhalation, accidental burns, uneven heating. Cold indoors became a different enemy. You lie down and notice how far the fire feels now. Even a few steps make a difference. Warmth fades quickly. The room is larger than the circle of heat. Bodies spread out. Shared warmth diminishes. Earlier, fire allowed people to sleep lightly, wake easily, adjust. Now sleep grows deeper. Fire burns unattended for longer. When it fades, cold arrives before anyone responds. You pull coverings closer and feel the limitation. Without movement or shared heat, you rely on layers and fuel alone. Awareness has less influence. You imagine an early human from long ago watching this scene. They would see fire doing less work despite more fuel. They would feel the inefficiency immediately. Something simple has been lost. Later technologies will improve this. Chimneys, stoves, insulation. But for now, this is a transitional world. Fire is no longer fully trusted, yet not fully mastered. Cold exploits the gap. You sit up and warm your hands. Feeling heat briefly restore sensation. It helps, but it feels incomplete. Fire here is helpful, but distant. It no longer shapes behavior directly. As the night deepens, you understand the shift clearly. When fire moved away from the center of shared life, warmth followed it. Early humans survived cold better because fire stayed close, demanded attention, and kept people moving together. Now fire is managed, controlled, and separated. Cold finds room to grow in that separation, and as you drift into sleep, you feel how this quiet change reshaped winter itself. You notice the change the moment you look at what people are wearing. Warmth is no longer the only goal. Clothing now carries messages. Rank, belonging, respectability. Cold does not disappear, but it is no longer the primary decision maker. Appearance begins to compete with survival. In settled societies, garments grow more complex. Layers are stitched closer to the body. Shapes become fixed. Sleeves narrow. Waistlines tighten. These designs look orderly and impressive, but they restrict movement. Where early clothing flowed and adjusted easily, These new forms demand posture and restraint. You feel it when you try one on. The fabric is heavier than hide, but less forgiving. When damp, it clings. When cold, it stiffens. Woven fibers hold moisture close to the skin. Drying them takes time and fuel, both limited in winter. There is strong historical evidence that clothing became a visible marker of social order in early civilizations. Laws defined who could wear certain colors, materials, or lengths. Warmth was filtered through status. Those of higher rank often wore garments that looked impressive but sacrificed practicality. Cold crept in quietly. You watch someone adjust a long sleeve that drags near the ground. It looks elegant, but it brushes snow and mud. Moisture climbs upward. Soon the cold reaches the arm. Fashion has created a pathway for chill. There is a small but telling detail recorded in later historical accounts. Many people owned few winter garments and wore them year-round, regardless of condition. Repairs focused on appearance rather than function. A visible tear mattered more than a hidden gap that let wind through. You compare this to earlier clothing habits. Hides were patched wherever needed. Function came first. Here, symmetry and appearance matter. Cold exploits vanity patiently. You notice footwear too. Shoes become thinner and more fitted. They protect against rough ground, but reduce circulation. Tight footwear restricts blood flow. Feet grow cold faster. Once cold, they recover slowly. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about whether changes in clothing contributed to increased winter illness. Restricted movement, damp fabrics, and reduced circulation likely played a role. Cold was no longer managed dynamically. It settled. You feel the psychological effect as well. People hesitate to adjust clothing freely in public. Loosening a garment looks improper. Removing layers looks careless. Social rules interfere with bodily signals. Discomfort is tolerated longer before action is taken. Children are taught early to sit still and keep clothes neat. Fidgeting is discouraged. Movement, once a source of warmth, becomes a sign of poor behavior. Cold gains advantage through discipline. You walk through a winter gathering and notice how people endure rather than adapt. They shiver quietly. They complain softly, but they do not move much. Fires burn nearby, but movement toward them is limited by custom. There is an overlooked observation in medieval household accounts. People often wore multiple layers indoors, even near fires, because clothing alone could not compensate for stillness. Warmth became something you piled on rather than something you generated. You feel the loss of feedback. Earlier, a cold finger meant move. Now it means endure until circumstances allow relief. Cold teaches fewer lessons because people stop listening. You think of how clothing once connected directly to the environment. Hides smelled of smoke and animal oil. They told stories of weather and labor. Now clothing smells of dye and storage. It belongs more to society than to nature. Later innovations will improve fabrics. Wool will insulate even when damp. Layering systems will return slowly. But during this period, cold finds opportunity in transition. You notice how people talk about winter now. They dread it. They complain about it. Cold becomes an enemy rather than a condition. Language shifts alongside behavior. You stand still for a moment and feel chill creep in. Instinct tells you to move. But social context restrains you. This hesitation did not exist before. It costs warmth. As night falls, people retreat indoors, dressed carefully, layered heavily. Fire burns, yet many still feel cold. The problem is no longer lack of protection. It is loss of responsiveness. You realize something quietly. Early humans survived cold better because clothing followed the body. Later civilizations dressed the body to follow rules. Cold took advantage of that reversal. As you wrap yourself tighter and finally allow movement again, warmth returns slowly. It takes longer now. The lesson is clear. When appearance outranks awareness, winter always wins. You lie down expecting rest. But something feels different now. The bed is soft, raised, and neatly arranged. It looks safer than the ground ever was. Yet as minutes pass, you feel warmth slip away more quickly than you expect. The cold does not announce itself. It drains quietly, through stillness. Earlier, sleep was shared, light, and responsive. Now it is private and heavy. Doors close. Bodies separate. Each person becomes a small island of warmth, surrounded by air that slowly cools. The room holds heat unevenly. The fire glows at a distance, offering comfort to the eyes more than to the skin. You notice how quickly your body stops moving. Beds invite stillness. Mattresses absorb heat. Thick coverings trap warmth at first, then hold moisture from breath and sweat. Once damp, they chill. You shift. But the space is limited. Movement feels disruptive rather than natural. There is historical evidence that as beds became more common, especially raised wooden beds, people experienced colder nights indoors. Elevation reduced contact with cold ground, but increased exposure to drafts. Cold air flows downward, but it also circulates around furniture, slipping beneath and around frames. You pull a blanket tighter and feel temporary relief. Yet without shared body heat, warmth must be maintained entirely by insulation and fire. When either fails, cold settles fast. Earlier sleep patterns involved frequent waking and repositioning. Here, sleep deepens. The body disengages more fully. Cold gains time to work before awareness returns. When you wake, stiffness greets you. Joints ache. Fingers feel slow. You remember nights outdoors where cold prompted gentle movement. A stretch. A shift closer to others. A brief walk. Indoors, movement feels unnecessary until it is already too late. Cold has already seeped in. There is a revealing observation in accounts from early modern households. Many people slept wearing most of their daytime clothing. This was not fashion. It was necessity. Bedding alone did not provide enough warmth. Clothing compensated for lost shared heat and movement. You feel how sleep itself changes. Dreams grow deeper. Waking becomes harder. The body prefers to stay still. This preference works against warmth. Circulation slows. Core temperature drops slightly. Without response, cold lingers longer. Some researchers suggest that the rise of solitary sleep altered human thermoregulation habits. Bodies accustomed to shared warmth suddenly had to manage heat alone for long periods. This transition may have increased vulnerability to cold-related illness. You notice how children fare in this arrangement. They are tucked into beds, layered carefully, then left to sleep. Their smaller bodies lose heat faster. Parents check on them, add blankets, adjust fires. Warmth becomes something monitored rather than shared instinctively. You wake briefly and listen. The house is quiet. No breathing nearby. No movement. Silence feels heavier indoors. Outdoors, silence meant danger. Here, it means separation. There is an emotional shift that accompanies this physical one. Solitary sleep increases anxiety during cold nights. You feel it yourself. The quiet amplifies discomfort. Cold feels more personal, less manageable. Earlier, shared sleep, distributed risk. If one person grew too cold, others noticed. Movement rippled through the group. Indoors, cold can go unnoticed until morning. You sit up and swing your legs over the bed. The floor is cold. Shock travels upward. This sudden temperature change is harsh. Outdoors, transitions were gradual. Indoors, contrast is extreme. You walk toward the fire and warm your hands. Feeling sensation returns slowly. It takes effort now. Warming is no longer automatic. It requires deliberate action. You think of how beds changed not only sleep, but behavior around sleep. People stopped adjusting constantly. They trusted furniture to do the work. Cold exploited that trust. Later innovations will attempt to fix this. Heavier blankets, curtains around beds, bed warmers. Each addition addresses a symptom, not the cause. Movement and shared heat are still missing. You return to bed and settle again. Aware now. You shift more often. You curl inward. You keep a layer of clothing on. Sleep becomes lighter once more. But it takes effort to maintain. The realization forms gently. Sleeping indoors in comfort came with a cost. Cold gained hours of uninterrupted access to the body. Early humans never gave it that much time. As you drift again, you understand why later civilizations, despite better shelter, often felt colder at night than their ancestors, sleeping under open skies. Warmth was no longer dynamic. It was passive, and cold thrives on passivity. Morning arrives with a heaviness in the body rather than sharp cold on the skin. You sit up slowly and feel it immediately. Joints resist movement. Muscles feel dull. Breath takes a moment to deepen. This is a different kind of winter weakness. One that settles inside rather than announcing itself at the edges. Cold no longer challenges you openly. It works quietly alongside illness. Early humans feared injuries most in winter. Later civilizations began to fear sickness. The two often arrived together. Cold weakened the body just enough to give disease time and space. Historical records from early settled societies show clear seasonal patterns in illness. Winter brought coughs, fevers, joint pain, and exhaustion, not always severe on their own, but persistent. Bodies already strained by cold indoors struggled to recover fully. Weakness compounded. You notice how dampness plays a role. Moist air irritates lungs. Smoke from constant fires fills enclosed spaces. Breathing becomes labor. Cold air outdoors was dry and clean by comparison. Indoors, air grows stale. Each breath feels heavier. There is strong evidence that respiratory illnesses increased as people spent more time inside during winter. Poor ventilation trapped smoke and pathogens. Cold air was blamed, but the true cause often lived within walls. You walk through a winter household and hear coughing echo softly. It is common enough not to alarm anyone. That familiarity is dangerous. When illness becomes expected, response slows. Cold continues to wear bodies down quietly. You feel the fatigue that follows weeks of limited movement. Energy dips. Appetite changes. The body tries to conserve. Cold and illness feed each other. Weakness invites chill. Chill deepens weakness. In earlier times, cold exposure outdoors was balanced by movement, fresh air, and varied activity. Illness still occurred, but recovery was often quicker. Bodies stayed active. Circulation stayed strong. Indoors, stillness lengthens recovery. You notice how elders suffer most. Joints stiffen. Cold settles deep in bones. Tasks that once kept them moving are taken away. They sit near fires. But movement decreases. Warmth reaches skin, but not joints. Children, too, feel the change. Confined indoors, they move less. Their bodies cool faster. Parents layer them heavily. But layers cannot replace motion. Restlessness is scolded rather than encouraged. Cold gains ground. There is an ongoing discussion among historians and medical researchers about whether early urban populations were less healthy overall despite technological advances. Winter appears repeatedly as a stress multiplier. Cold alone was survivable. Cold combined with illness was deadly. You remember how early humans treated cold signals seriously. Shivering meant, act now. Indoors, signals blur. A cough might be dismissed. Stiffness becomes normal. Response is delayed. You step outside briefly and feel the clarity return. Cold bites sharper, but breathing feels easier. Movement feels possible again. This contrast is striking. It suggests that winter indoors introduced new vulnerabilities rather than removing old ones. Later societies will develop medical theories to explain winter illness. Imbalances, bad air, humors. Yet the practical solution remains simple: movement, fresh air, and responsiveness. Early humans practiced these without naming them. You think of how cold once trained the body. Now it erodes it slowly. The difference lies not in temperature, but in how people live within it. You return inside and feel heaviness settle again. Fire warms the room, but does not restore vitality. Warmth without movement cannot replace what has been lost. As the day goes on, you see how people pace themselves cautiously. Energy is precious. Illness lingers. Winter feels long and draining. The realization comes quietly. Later, civilizations did not become weaker because they faced harsher winters. They faced winters differently. Cold stopped being a signal and became a background condition. Illness stepped into the gap. Early humans survived cold better because their lives kept bodies resilient. Movement stayed constant. Air stayed fresh. Awareness stayed sharp. Cold had fewer allies. As evening approaches, you rest again. Aware now of the cost of winter lived indoors, cold has not defeated humanity. It has simply changed its strategy. And as you close your eyes, you understand that survival is not only about shelter or fire, but about preserving the habits that keep the body strong enough to answer winter when it comes. You start to notice what is missing long before anyone says it out loud. The cold still comes each year. Snow still falls. Winds still shift. But the ability to read those changes has faded. People react later now, often too late. The language of cold, once spoken fluently, has become half forgotten. Earlier, the body was the first instrument. Skin noticed wind direction. Ears felt pressure change. Smell warned of snow before it arrived. These signals shape decisions quietly. Where to stop, when to eat, when to move. In settled life, those signals are dulled by walls, clothing, and routine. You step outside a building and feel surprised by the cold, even though it has been there all along. Indoors, temperature barely changed hour to hour. Outdoors, variation feels abrupt. The body has not been practicing awareness. It must relearn it each time. There is evidence from historical writings that people in later societies relied increasingly on calendars rather than observation. Winter arrived on a date rather than through sensation. Cold became abstract. Preparation followed schedule rather than feeling. You notice how people talk about weather now. They describe it as good or bad. Not informative. Cold is complained about. Not analyzed. Wind is cursed. Not read. Snow is something to endure rather than something that signals deeper changes. Earlier humans used cold as feedback. A sudden chill meant adjust now. Later humans interpret cold as inconvenience. Adjustment waits until discomfort becomes severe. You feel this delay in your own body. Fingers grow numb before you think to move. Shoulders tighten before you shift position. Response is slower. Cold gains time. There is a revealing detail in accounts from early explorers who lived briefly with mobile groups. Many described how their hosts noticed subtle weather changes hours before visible signs appeared. Shifts in bird behavior, changes in sound, differences in smell. These observations guided action. Settled observers often missed them. You walk through a town as clouds gather. No one changes pace. No one adjusts clothing yet. The cold deepens quietly. When it finally becomes uncomfortable, response is hurried and inefficient. You think of how early humans treated cold as a conversation. It spoke first. They answered quickly. Here, cold, must shout before anyone listens. The loss is not only physical, it is cultural. Skills once taught through daily practice no longer pass easily between generations. Children grow up indoors. Their first lessons are about rules and schedules, not sensation. You watch a child step outside without proper adjustment and feel shock hit their face. They hesitate, unsure what to do. Their instinct has not been trained. An adult rushes to intervene, pulling them back inside rather than teaching them how to respond. Cold becomes something to avoid rather than understand. Avoidance limits learning. Learning fades. There is discussion among historians about whether this loss of environmental awareness contributed to later disasters during harsh winters. Crop failures, mass illness, starvation. People waited for signs that came too late. You feel how different this is from earlier life. There, even discomfort had value. It sharpened attention. Here, comfort blunts it. You stand still and try to listen to the cold again. You feel where it presses hardest. You notice where the wind slips through gaps. Slowly, awareness returns. But it takes effort now. It is no longer automatic. You realize that early humans survived cold better because they never stopped listening. Cold never became background noise. It stayed foreground information. As evening approaches, you sense the shift clearly. The loss of cold reading skills did not happen overnight. It faded gradually, replaced by routines and structures that promised safety. Those structures worked most of the time, but when they failed, people no longer knew how to respond quickly. Cold reclaimed ground. You pull your clothing closer and step into the open air again, determined to feel rather than judge. The cold speaks softly at first. You listen, and in that listening, you recover a small piece of what was lost. The understanding that winter is not silent. It is always speaking. Survival depends on remembering how to hear it. You pause and notice how often the word primitive is used when people speak about early humans. It carries weight. It suggests weakness, ignorance, and constant struggle. Yet standing here, feeling how carefully cold was managed, that word begins to feel misplaced. The image does not match the reality. Later societies often imagined their ancestors as barely surviving, shivering in darkness, waiting for progress to rescue them. This story comforts those who tell it. It frames modern life as a triumph over misery. But comfort does not always equal resilience. And progress does not always mean improvement in every direction. You look again at the earlier way of life. No walls thick enough to hide weather. No schedules rigid enough to override sensation. No layers of routine separating body from environment. Cold was present. But it was not mysterious. It was familiar. There is a widespread assumption in popular history that early humans suffered more simply because they had less technology, less shelter, less control. Yet suffering is not measured only by exposure. It is measured by helplessness. Early humans were exposed, but rarely helpless. You feel the difference in your own body. Outdoors, cold announces itself early. You respond. Indoors, cold hides. It waits. By the time you notice, it has already taken something from you. Awareness matters more than protection alone. You think about how later writers described ancient life using their own standards. Warmth meant constant comfort. Safety meant separation. When they imagined life without those things, they imagined misery. They did not imagine adaptation. You recall earlier moments. Bodies moving gently through night. Shared warmth. Food timed for heat. Clothing adjusted constantly. Shelter chosen with care. These were not desperate acts. They were skilled ones. There is a tendency to equate complexity with intelligence. Yet many early solutions to cold were elegant precisely because they were simple. They worked because they aligned with how bodies function. Later solutions often fought the body instead. You see how myths formed. Early humans lacked permanent houses. Therefore, they must have been cold. Early humans lacked beds. Therefore, they must have slept poorly. Early humans lacked tailored clothing. Therefore, they must have suffered. Each assumption ignores how systems work together. There is an interesting pattern in historical narratives. When later societies faced harsh winters that overwhelmed their systems, They sometimes described those winters as unnatural or cursed. When early humans faced similar conditions, they described them as expected. Language reveals attitude. Cold was not framed as betrayal by nature. It was part of the agreement. You notice how fear changes the experience of cold. Fear tightens muscles. It restricts breathing. It wastes heat. Early humans did not fear cold constantly. They respected it. That difference matters physiologically as well as psychologically. You stand still and let the cold touch your face. It feels sharp, but not hostile. When fear is removed, sensation becomes information again. There is discussion among anthropologists about whether early humans experienced less chronic anxiety despite higher risks. One explanation offered is predictability. Cold followed patterns. When you lived inside those patterns, uncertainty decreased. Modern life often feels safer, yet less predictable in subtle ways. You reflect on how modern myths of progress shape expectations. People expect warmth on demand. When it fails, frustration rises quickly. Early humans expected variation. When it arrived, they adjusted. You think of how children learn today. They are shielded from cold carefully, sometimes too carefully. Discomfort is avoided. Yet without exposure, there is no learning. Skills fade before they are needed. You remember how early children played at the edges of cold, running into wind, retreating, learning limits through sensation. This play was education. The myth of primitive suffering erases this intelligence. It replaces it with pity. Pity blinds us to lessons. You feel a quiet respect grow. Not romantic admiration, but recognition. Early humans were not waiting to be saved by civilization. They were already solving the problems they faced with the tools and knowledge available to them. Later, civilizations solved different problems: population growth, storage, administration. But in solving those, they often unsolved older solutions without realizing it. You look back once more at the long path from open land to crowded towns. Cold did not become more severe. Human strategies changed. The myth persists because it flatters the present. But standing here, feeling the cold and understanding how it was once met, the myth loses its grip. Early humans survived cold better, not because they were tougher or luckier, but because they understood it deeply. That understanding does not belong only to the past. It can still be remembered. As you breathe out slowly and feel the air cool your lungs, you realize something calming. Cold has always been the same. It is our relationship with it that changes. And sometimes, the old ways still have much to teach. You begin to see the pattern clearly now. Survival in cold was never about a single invention or a single breakthrough. It was a skill set, a collection of habits, responses, and quiet decisions repeated every day until they became instinct. Early humans did not survive because they had better tools. They survived because they behaved differently. Cold survival lived in routine rather than technology. It showed up in how people woke, how they moved, how they ate, and how they rested. None of these actions looked dramatic on their own. Together, they formed a system that kept bodies functional in conditions that later societies would struggle to tolerate. You think back to the earliest moments of the story. Open land, moving bodies, fire tended constantly, clothing adjusted rather than fixed, sleep broken into gentle cycles, food chosen for heat as much as nourishment. Each element supported the others. Remove one, and the system weakened. Later civilizations invested heavily in objects: walls, beads, stoves, clothing rules, schedules. These objects worked well when everything functioned perfectly, but they reduced flexibility. When conditions changed suddenly, people had fewer ways to respond. You feel this difference in your own body as you imagine relying on skill rather than structure. Skill travels with you. Structure stays behind. In a cold world, mobility matters. There is a revealing observation from survival psychology. People trained in skills adapt faster under stress than people who rely on equipment alone. Equipment fails. Skills adjust. Early humans carried their solutions inside their bodies. You remember how cold once guided behavior continuously. A slight chill changed posture. A deeper chill changed movement. A sharper chill changed location. Cold was part of decision-making, not something noticed only at extremes. Later societies outsourced these decisions. Thermometers replaced sensation. Calendars replaced observation. Alarms replaced awareness. Cold stopped shaping behavior until it became disruptive. You realize now that early humans did not tolerate cold better because they endured more suffering. They tolerated it better because they avoided unnecessary suffering. They responded early, often, and gently. You picture a later traveler stepping into a cold landscape with modern expectations. They wait for shelter. They wait for fire. They wait for comfort to return. While they wait, cold works. Early humans did not wait. They acted. There is an ongoing conversation among historians about whether resilience is lost or merely hidden in modern societies. The ability to respond to cold may still exist, but it is rarely practiced. Like any skill, it weakens when unused. You think of how quickly the body adapts when given the chance. Even now, a few days of exposure sharpen awareness. Movement becomes natural again. Appetite shifts. Sleep lightens. The body remembers faster than the mind expects. This suggests that early human advantages were not locked in biology alone. They were learned behaviors passed down through practice. That makes them recoverable. You feel the calm that comes with this realization. Cold does not need to be feared. It needs to be met with the right habits. You reflect on how modern people often search for single answers. Better clothing, better heating, better buildings. These help, but they never replace attentiveness. Early humans survived cold better because they treated it as a full-body experience. Not a problem to solve once. You stand still for a moment and let cold touch you again. You notice where it gathers first. Fingers, face, neck. You respond instinctively now. Hands move. Shoulders shift. Breath deepens. Warmth returns slowly, but reliably. This is what skill feels like. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Quietly effective. You understand now why later civilizations, despite wealth and technology, often struggled during extreme winters. When systems failed, habits were gone. Cold arrived faster than response. Early humans lived without backup systems. That forced them to keep their skills sharp at all times. Cold never caught them completely unprepared. You imagine teaching these skills again, not as survival training, but as awareness practice. Teaching children to feel cold and respond rather than panic. Teaching adults to move rather than wait. Teaching communities to share warmth dynamically rather than divide it. The idea feels gentle rather than urgent. There is no need to return to ancient life, only to remember parts of it. You feel your breathing slow as understanding settles in. The lesson is not about hardship. It is about relationship. Early humans had a working relationship with cold. Later societies tried to dominate it. Dominance requires constant effort. Relationship requires attention. As you prepare to move forward in the story, you carry this insight with you. Cold has not changed. The human body has not changed much either. What changed was habit. And habits, once seen clearly, can always be adjusted again. You bring the thought closer now. Closer than history. Closer than theory. You bring it into your own body. You imagine yourself stepping out of a warm room and into real cold, without the layers of habit that usually protect you. The first sensation is shock. Not because the cold is extreme, but because your expectations are wrong. Your body hesitates. It waits for warmth to return on its own. A heater, a wall, a solution that arrives from outside. Nothing happens. Cold stays. And in that pause, you feel how different modern instincts have become. Early humans would not pause here. They would move without thinking. They would shift posture, adjust breathing, change direction, seek shelter or sun or others. You have to remember to do these things now. They are no longer automatic. You take a step and feel warmth begin to return slowly. Another step helps more. Breath deepens. Muscles engage. The body remembers. Not perfectly. Not immediately. But enough. This tells you something important. The capacity never disappeared. It simply went unused. You think about how often modern life removes the need to respond physically. Cold arrives and we add layers. Hunger arrives and we snack. Fatigue arrives and we sit. These responses are not wrong, but they shorten the feedback loop. The body stops practicing problem solving. Early humans practiced constantly. Every day was rehearsal. Every small chill was a lesson. By the time severe cold arrived, the response was smooth and familiar. You feel how modern cold tolerance is fragile. A power outage, a broken heater, a delayed commute. Suddenly, discomfort becomes crisis. Not because the cold is new, but because the response has been outsourced. You imagine an early human watching you shiver and wait. They would not judge you. They would move you gently, point to the ground, show you how to stand, how to angle your body, how to breathe. Cold was taught through demonstration, not explanation. You begin to see that later civilizations did not forget cold skills because they were inferior. They forgot them because they were no longer required every day. Skill fades quietly when it is not needed. You test yourself again. You step into the cold and respond sooner this time. You move. You notice wind direction. You tuck your hands briefly, then let them swing. Circulation improves. The sensation shifts from threat to challenge. There is a sense of calm in this. Not bravado. Not toughness. Just competence. The kind that comes from knowing what to do next. You reflect on how modern narratives often frame cold tolerance as extreme behavior. Ice baths. Endurance challenges. Tests of will. Early humans did not treat cold as something to conquer dramatically. They treated it as a condition to live within skillfully. You feel the difference. There is no adrenaline spike here. No fight response. Just adjustment. You imagine living this way for weeks rather than minutes. The body would adapt further. Appetite would change. Sleep would shift. Awareness would sharpen. These are not fantasies. They are documented responses to repeated exposure. This makes you reconsider the idea of progress. Comfort increased. Safety increased. But adaptability decreased. When conditions fall outside normal ranges, the cost becomes clear. You do not feel angry about this. You feel curious. Skills can return. Habits can be rebuilt. Awareness can be trained again. You think about what early humans would find strange about modern life. Not buildings or technology, but how disconnected people are from their own sensations. How often they ignore signals until alarms sound. You remember earlier moments in the story? Cold as teacher, cold as guide, cold as feedback. None of that required suffering. It required attention. You feel your breathing slow. The cold still touches your skin, but it no longer feels invasive. It feels like a conversation you are beginning to understand again. You imagine teaching this to someone else. You would not lecture. You would step outside with them. You would show them how to feel without panic, how to respond early, how to trust their body. This is what early humans did naturally. Teaching happened through shared experience, not words alone. You realize now that early humans survived cold better because they lived in a constant state of gentle readiness. Not tension, not fear, readiness. The body expected variation and met it with movement. Modern bodies expect stability. When stability breaks, confusion follows. You take one last look at yourself in this imagined cold. You are not as fragile as you once believed. You are simply out of practice. The understanding settles warmly despite the chill. Survival skills are not relics. They are dormant abilities. Cold reveals them quickly when allowed. As you prepare to move into the final stretch of the story, you carry this personal insight with you. The distance between early humans and modern ones is not as large as it seems. It is measured mostly in habits. And habits, once noticed, can change. You slow your pace now, not because the cold is stronger, but because understanding has settled in. The story has moved through bodies, fire, movement, food, shelter, and habit. All of it leads here, to a quieter place, a place where nothing new is introduced, only remembered. You stand still for a moment and feel the cold around you. It has not changed since the beginning. The air is the same air that touched early human skin tens of thousands of years ago. The wind moves the same way. The ground pulls heat the same way. Cold itself has been consistent. What changed was how people lived inside it. Early humans did not think of cold as something to defeat. They thought of it as something to stay ahead of. That difference shaped everything. They stayed mobile. They stayed aware. They stayed close to one another. They listened early and responded gently. Later civilizations chose stability over movement, comfort over awareness, structure over flexibility. Those choices solved many problems. But they changed the relationship with winter. Cold gained time. It gained allies in stillness, dampness, and isolation. You feel how simple the early approach really was. No single action saved anyone. Survival came from many small choices made early. A step taken sooner. A layer adjusted in time. A meal eaten for warmth rather than taste. A fire tended before it faded. A body moved before it stiffened. None of this required suffering. It required attention. You realize now why early humans often appeared calm in harsh conditions. Calm was not bravery. It was familiarity. Cold did not surprise them. Surprise wastes energy. Familiarity conserves it. You think of later societies facing winter with dread, preparing for it weeks in advance, stockpiling fuel, sealing buildings, bracing themselves. Cold became an event rather than a condition. Anxiety replaced awareness. You breathe slowly and feel how calm changes your body. Muscles loosen. Breathing deepens. Warmth spreads more easily. Fear had been tightening things unnecessarily. Early humans lived close enough to cold that fear never had much room to grow. They responded before fear arrived. You look back over the long arc of history and see the trade clearly. Civilization brought safety, scale, and abundance. It also dulled certain skills. Cold tolerance was one of them. Not because bodies weakened, but because habits changed. You do not feel the need to judge that change. Every way of life solves some problems and creates others. What matters is remembering that older solutions still exist inside the body. You feel that truth now. Even here. Even now. Your body knows how to answer cold when you let it. Movement helps. Awareness helps. Shared warmth helps. Early response helps. You think of the phrase survived better. It does not mean early humans lived longer or more comfortably in every way. It means that within cold itself, they had fewer blind spots. Cold rarely caught them unprepared. Later civilizations built barriers and systems. When those failed, cold returned stronger because the skills had faded. You stand quietly and let the final insight settle. Survival was never about being tougher. It was about being attentive. Early humans survived cold better because their lives trained them to notice early and act gently. And as you feel the cold soften its grip, simply because you are listening, you realize that this knowledge is not locked in the past. It rests quietly in the present, waiting to be remembered. Now the pace slows even further. You do not need to think anymore. The images begin to blur gently. Firelight fades. Wind softens. The body grows heavy in a comfortable way. You imagine yourself resting somewhere safe, not sealed away from the world, but aligned with it. Breath moves in and out without effort. Muscles loosen one by one. The cold no longer feels sharp or demanding. It feels distant. Thoughts drift more slowly now. History recedes. Analysis fades. Only sensation remains. A steady rhythm of breathing. A calm awareness of warmth where it matters most. You have nothing left to solve. Nothing left to understand tonight. The story has done its work. As sleep approaches, you carry one quiet reassurance with you. Humans have faced winter before. The body knows what to do. It always has. So let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. Let the cold remain outside the edges of your awareness. You are safe. You are warm enough. And it is time to rest. Sweet dreams.